Welcome to Cross Section, conversations at the intersection of faith, news, and culture. We are excited to be on YouTube. Please subscribe to the Evangelical Alliance YouTube channel to never miss an episode.
This week on Cross Section, we discuss power, privacy, and persecution as we look at the big global and domestic stories. We also finish by predicting what's going to happen at the Oscars next week. Enjoy the episode.
Hello and welcome back to Cross Section. It's Zanna. I am back and I'm joined with Alicia in the studio and Peter from Northern Ireland. How are we both?
Bandy doozy.
Yeah, excited. It's lovely to have you replacing Danny. It's fantastic.
I know, I'm excited to be here. Obviously, we lose Peter and then he returns, and then we lose Danny, who is currently on his way to Albania. So the team can't all be together in the UK at the same time, but I'm delighted to be back. So thank you for having me. Before we get into our main conversations, one story that we wanted to touch on quickly because it has caught our eye this week is a story that involves Apple and our government. Alicia, what's going on there?
Yeah, I feel I'm taking on the learning from a previous episode of Cross Section where I was like, I don't care about tech in any way, shape, or form, for which Peter corrected me on that. And it's essentially that this week on Monday, traveling into the office, I saw that the government have managed to persuade Apple to change its advanced data protection kind of encryption, end-to-end encryption on all kind of Apple phones and devices. Now, the rationale of the government is that they want to have better access to monitor online criminality, to check child exploitation, to kind of enforce the law in a digital space. But I think my main question is actually where's the balance between privacy and national security? And for me, I think this is going to be an emerging topic and theme that's going to happen throughout 2025, whereby the government is going to be encroaching both in the digital space, but also within kind of physical spaces and our personal freedoms. So I just thought it was just worth talking about, and kind of props to Peter for the education in a previous episode to engage on this topic.
Yeah, and I think Apple would say they haven't changed their mind, as in they won't offer this advanced service in the UK because they refuse to compromise on privacy. And the Home Office said you need to allow us a backdoor, a key in, and Apple say we don't have a key and we won't create one. So they basically withdrawn the service. So in the end, the effect is the same. We are compromised in the UK. We don't have the same advanced security settings. But I think this is going to be a constant place of pushback because the tech firms are mining the data, they're using the data in all sorts of ways. It's not that I'm like, oh, I don't want you to see my communication with my work colleagues or daughter, but actually I'm like, but also at the same time, you don't have the right to see it. You don't have the right to check what's going on, because at some point you might decide to monitor that and you might not like what I'm going to say about freedom of religion and belief, and some of the stuff we say here at some point might. So I definitely like the fact that Apple are pretty strong on privacy, and I hope they keep this. And I'm glad in a sense they've said, well, then we'll just not give you the service in the UK. That's a compromise, but I think there's going to be more pushback in time. But we're lazy because we want the tech, and so we'll just give away our rights and we'll give away our information. And I'm lazy sometimes too. But this is a thing I think we're going to have to keep an eye on, and we'll keep coming back to.
Yes, agreed. And I'm also definitely lazy of just like, I don't need to think about that. But yes, I suspect this will be a conversation that continues. But on to our first big conversation, which we are going to have a bit of a political rundown of some big conversations that have happened this week, some big things that have happened this week involving lots of nations and lots of kind of big, important men that just seem to be filling our news feeds. Monday was the 3-year anniversary since Russia invaded Ukraine, a pretty significant milestone. And this week has also seen a pretty significant deal between Ukraine and America, as they have made an agreement on a minerals deal. Trump has said that this, in quotes, very big deal would give Ukraine the right to fight on in its war with Russia. What are your both reactions to this?
Well, I think initially a 3-year milestone is one of deep lament. War is incredibly easy to start, and I feel that whilst ending the war is definitely one of urgency, the conversation that we're not having a part of kind of these mineral exchanges, Trump's conversation with Putin, Europe's continuing conversation around defense and its protection of kind of the continent, is what does rebuilding and a kind of restoration look like, given not just the kind of desecration and demolition of so many places, but lives that need to be rebuilt. Many people have fled to other European countries, and it's incredibly a difficult time. And just even hearing that story of kind of a minerals exchange, Ukraine's kind of land is one of resource and wealth. It has an undertone to me of kind of exploiting the moment, in terms of Trump trying to get an upper hand in the conversation around what's best for the US in this moment. And it's very difficult that President Zelensky feels that this is a means to an end in order to have continuing support and investment in kind of defending their land and their nation and their existence within Europe. So it's one of deep lament for me at the moment.
We've got the madness of what happened at the UN. So, like this week, we had a vote at the UN on the anniversary of the Ukraine invasion. I think the Europeans put forward one measure and they got large success, but not some of the key players. And then you've got Russia, Belarus, and North Korea all voting together with, guess who? The USA on the same side. An emotion that failed to condemn Russia for the invasion. So, hugely destabilizing there. Trump is, the one thing I'll say in his defense, and this would be a rare comment for me, is he did say up front before the election, Europe aren't paying to defend their own borders. They need to wise up. He said it before last time he was in power. This time he was much clearer. And he's right in one sense. They aren't. And America are saying we're not going to keep bankrolling this. And actually Ukraine has resources to pay for it. I don't like the deal. I'm not even sure we have a deal. Zanna, I know you said we've got a deal. At least anything I'm reading is there's a sort of deal. And of course, it's a big deal because Trump made it.
Yeah.
He's never made a small deal. And that doesn't mean there is an actual deal. And this is part of the whole destabilizing thing is like he seemed 2 or 3 days ago to be pro-Russia, sit down with them. Ukraine aren't even getting to the talks. Zelensky's a dictator. He won't hold elections. Now he's like, Zelensky's my mate. He's coming to see me in Washington on Friday. We've got a big deal. I'm like, okay, I'm totally confused as to which one of these things is true. He's now got enough resources. He can keep fighting on as long as he pays us. And in one sense, that is a factor of war. You have to be able to fund the war. But it's a constant destabilizing, crazy kind of narrative out there. And Europe in particular don't know what to do. So we've got our own prime minister going to see Trump here at, I think, the weekend. Macron has already been. The Germans have just got a new leader coming through. And he's kind of said, look, Trump's mad. We're not even going to deal with that. It's a rewriting of so many things. And I think for most people looking in, even those of us who love this area, like, wow, every single day it's a new idea coming. And a group of guys, as you said, it is almost exclusively men in this conversation who are rewriting the rules. And it's hard to keep up with.
Yeah, and I'm glad you touched on that meeting with the French President Macron. He has indicated that there could be a ceasefire deal within weeks. I mean, yeah, do you have any response to that? Do we think, I guess we'll just have to see, and who knows what's happening? It feels like it's changing all the time.
I think the instability, building on that theme that Peter spoke about, that is really unsettling and nerving just watching the kind of press conference, is how much President Macron is buying into Trump's version of events of what the future of Europe and particularly Ukraine and the relationship with Russia should be going forward. And so he speaks in glowing terms of the role of the United States. I think his language, if you're prepared to even listen to the 45-minute exchange and the press kind of release and kind of conversation, he never referred to Russia's invasion as war. He kept talking about it as an attack. He, in very much ways kept saying, so I think someone, kind of a journalist was asking a question to Macron and being like, what advice are you giving to President Trump in terms of the role of the US in kind of engaging in this conversation more diplomatically rather than the strong arm, and his response was like, I'm not here to advise the President Trump. And it seems like no one's willing to confront the real reality that we have at hand. What does peace look like, and how do you cross that line to do that? But no one's willing to kind of challenge President Trump in some of his narrative and his explanation of the situation going forward, for fear that it impacts their own personal relationship and issues of tariffs and issues of kind of ongoing diplomacy that impacts them nationally. And I think that's going to be the continuing conversation we're going to see when our own Prime Minister goes to Washington in the next couple of days, that I think many are going to be quite disappointed that he didn't assert a very strong response or show leadership. And just kind of countering that, I think we're talking about this as a conversation of men. Kemi Badenoch, the opposition leader, Conservative leader, yesterday at kind of policy exchange, gave her address. And she keeps building on this theme that we're in a new world order, there's a new Europe, there's a new way that we need to engage, and that we need to not be weak. The conversation theme from ARC's conference last episode, check it out. And that we need to be strong. But what does that actually mean? What does it mean to be strong in this moment? And I'm quite fearful of what's likely to come out is prideful solutions, arrogance, and boastful leadership moving forward. So yeah, it's a difficult time.
Oh, it's definitely tricky. Somebody said, how do you know when Macron is disagreeing with Trump? They said he's speaking in French.
Yes.
So Starmer doesn't have that option. Macron had some critique, but it was always narrated in French. And I just think this is going to be the recurring theme. Everybody's trying to deal with Trump, but it's not just Trump. It is Musk and others around him. This is more than Trump. There is a new order being emerging. You've got the German elections. You've got the Christian Democrats coming through, Christian Democratic Union, CDU party there. They're right of center. The most obvious people in one sense for them to do a deal with are the AFD, but they've absolutely refused to do that. The AFD are the right, far right, alt-right, extreme right. There's lots of different ways of describing them party, who garnered just probably about 20% of the vote, it looks like. Sat beside an academic guy at that conference, and he was an AFD guy and really intrigued and a member, and very plausible, very sensible, but everything I read says something different. And then they've grown predominantly in the old East Germany. So German politics being rewritten to a degree, French politics, our politics, you see all the polling says reform are topping any kind of polls. These are obviously between election polls. And then when you ask reform voters about whether they like Putin, whether they're pro-Russia, much more likely to be. And so we're finding ourselves in a strange mix of things going on. And what's Keir Starmer's response at the minute? The first thing is he has to spend more money on defence, otherwise you don't get to the table. So he's agreed to do that, but he's agreed to do that at the cost of our aid, our overseas aid. And he's taken the easiest way out in that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Peter. You've just done my segue very nicely there for me. Yes, as we kind of bring these stories closer to home, having kind of had that global perspective, it has been a significant week in the UK with Starmer announcing a significant reduction in the UK's foreign aid budget to fund an increase in defence spending. It will be cut from 0.5% of national income to 0.3% by 2027. This has had huge kind of ripple effects and is pretty significant. Yeah, what's kind of your initial reaction, Alicia, to this?
I mean, as a British citizen engaged in the last election, Labour came out with a manifesto of saying that they would increase international development aid as the direction of travel. That's our ambition once the economy was strong enough to do that. And in this moment, again, it's political posturing to get not just a seat at the table, but to get the winning ear of whom they believe. President Trump is an influential character that is in many ways is pulling quite a lot of strings and kind of the political cards at this moment ahead of that meeting to say, yes, we in the UK are going to invest in defence. And as you rightly say, there's been a strong reaction across the political divide. I think Andrew Mitchell, former Minister of State for the previous Conservative government, came out with strong words against it. And Claire Short, Baroness Claire Short, who was the first Secretary of State for International Development under the Tony Blair administration, has come out and criticised Keir Starmer's direction on this, saying that this isn't, yes, increased defence, because that is a desirable and actually a huge need, given that so much of war and how much depleted kind of resources and funding and military kind of capabilities are. But to do that at the expense of the poor, that is the decision that people are not reconciling as the right decision moving forward. So it is incredibly difficult, but I think contrast with the US, I think, Peter, you was talking about how this is very different to kind of the US aid cuts in terms of Keir Starmer's direction.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that there's a peace dividend. We thought we could get away with spending less on defence. So the two conversations have become merged because of what Keir Starmer did. So do we need to spend more on defence? Almost certainly yes, because the world is a less stable place. It's not because we have a desire to go to war, but because of the realities of that. And because we made commitments as part of NATO that we would do that. And we have been underspending, as everybody has. then to take that from aid was like the cheap shot, because they did promise to go back up to 0.7, as you were saying, Alicia, 0.7% of GDP once they could afford to. It was at 0.5, and they were very critical of the last government for cutting it to that. And then they've taken it down to 0.3. That is staggeringly low. And aid helps other countries, but it also helps Britain. And I do think it's different than USAID, but there are overlaps. USAID was getting severely critiqued for some of the spending. I mean, some of the stuff out there they were spending money on, um, uh, DEI musicals and transgender operas and comic books, and I mean, crazy things around the world. So it felt like an easy cut. But you just need to read Christianity Today and other magazines and other news outlets to know how many Christian organizations have had massive amounts of funding cut. Christian Hospital in Southern Africa, there, $21 billion a year, gets $7 billion of that from USAID. It's massive amounts of guaranteed funding for Christian organizations to do work on the ground. So these cuts have huge implications. Some of it, I'm going, great. Stonewall in the UK, it turns out I've lost a load of money from USAID. Staggering that that's what the USAID budget was being used to fund. I'm quite right too that it's being cut back. I have no qualms about that. The Times has covered that, and I think that's a good thing, because all sorts of strange advocacy was being done under this budget. But at the same time, because of the kind of very blunt way in which it's being done, that has implications globally on lots of really good and necessary programs, including famine relief in southern Sudan, including anti-malaria programs right across southern Saharan Africa. So you've got huge problems, and we will suffer the same when we carry a budget like that. That's a massive amount of what we all voted for and thought we were doing, and we as a country should be supporting lots of good projects. So I have real concerns, and it's short-sighted, because actually a lot of that funding and a lot of that money was spent in ways that actually helped the country, but also global stability and peace. And I think that's where we're going to see some problems in this moment.
Yeah, definitely. I think watching the outworking of this will be interesting and potentially quite difficult to just see the reality as that kind of outplays over the next couple of years. But kind of going from these stories that have been dominating the news, you go on any front page and you are seeing these pictures of Trump, Macron. We are going to talk about a couple of stories of extremely harrowing persecution of Christians that we have seen, and we kind of want to talk about. They kind of, I guess, reflect the instability of the world, the reality that so many people are facing, but they aren't being talked about in the secular news in the way that these other stories are. So I'm just going to briefly give a snapshot into two different things that have happened in the last couple of weeks. The first one is a couple of weeks ago, 70 Christians were found beheaded in a church in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in the DRC, and communities are just reeling from that, as you can imagine. I saw one quote from someone being like, "Oh, I'm going to paraphrase this, but just we don't have the words, we don't know how to pray. We are just so we just can't be dealing with massacring." And it's just those words, the fact that that is a repeated kind of thing that they are having to face, and not, we don't have to use the word massacre in our daily language. But that is their reality. And then another story, a mob of 200 people were attacked 50 Christians who gathered for a service in Rajasthan in India. That happened, I think a few days later. Both of these stories are horrible and just really difficult to hear, but are not the only things that are happening to Christians across the world. I'm sure there are others that haven't been picked up in the news or on other kind of Christian sites. Why is that? Why are we not hearing about these on the BBC front page?
The BBC reporting on religious freedom, that's a request I should put in. I mean, I think the reality is, I don't think left-leaning media elites know how to engage in, it's not the nuance, but the harsh reality of political Islam, violence against another minority group. And that minority group is, yes, women, yes, ethnic minority, yes, underrepresented in communities, yes, on the continent of Africa. But the language of Christian persecution, I don't think any of our media outlets know how to engage with that constructively and report on it as one of the kind of global injustices that are being faced around the world. And I think, to be frank, I think because it's to do with the delicate issues of religion, the delicate issues of the media not knowing how to engage on the real threat of political Islam and the extremism in parts of the world, and religious persecution, it's just easier to not even put it on the back page or lower down in the news stories. And I think as Christians, I mean, we're talking about kind of the global news where all the news is focused on the main headlines. I think for us, the challenge is to not get so tunnel vision on immediate needs in the UK, our own, but also to have a context, a language, a kind of a prayerful upward looking of the global church internationally, and what can we be doing to elevate their concerns, their realities to our kind of domestic and local leaders. And I think that's definitely a role that the church in the UK needs to play on this, and Open Doors has done an incredible job in kind of articulating that to its members and followers, and I think we need to continue to do the same.
Yeah, look, one of the reasons I was not with us for a few weeks was I was cycling in Rwanda, which is right beside the DRC. We were doing a charity cycle for some things there, and actually our trip got moved because of some of the violence right on the border of the DRC. We were supposed to go right close to there, so really following this story, and I mean, it is absolutely harrowing. So the DRC story specifically is an ISIS kind of splinter group has been involved in that piece of violence. So again, there's a reluctance to name that. This ADF group that carried out these killings, 70 people killed, they were butchered, they were massacred, I mean, this was with machetes, this was incredibly brutal. But it also feeds into a larger piece of history there. There's a global piece of instability. The reason we couldn't go was not this specific attack, but more generally, Rwanda and the DRC are basically fighting a little sub-war with a group called M23. So you've got colonialism at play there, and the impact of Belgium and France and all the other countries in that space. And if you want to listen to the rest of history, has a wonderful 3-part series on the DRC, a really fascinating and really helpful 3-part series in the DRC, even in the last few weeks. You've got minerals, because it's AI and tech. It's all about cobalt. It's about things like that it can be mined there, and who's battling for that, and who wants control of that. And then it's about religious freedom, and it's about power games and the West's failure to respond to the genocide in 1994, their guilt around that, allowing Paul Kagame to be the continual president of Rwanda for such a long period of time. The people there do seem to love him. I asked nearly everybody I met around this, but at the same time, he's behind some of the violence that's going on right around that border. Not the religious piece of this, but it gets super complex as you get down into it. And so we absolutely need to be praying for what's happening in these parts of the world. Like this is stuff that's not making the front page for all the reasons that Alicia said. Nor is the stuff in India. So it's different there. This is an Indian government that doesn't like forced conversions. It likes to say is the reason there. But there are so many stories coming out of India, which has, over 1 billion people, the largest Muslim population in the world, but it's a minority population, and then one of the largest Christian populations in the world. I don't know the numbers, but I'm going to guess it's 50 to 100 million Christians. Kerala, the state in the south, predominantly Christian, but they're a minority within this country, a Hindu country. Hindus tended to be neutral over the years to this, but has definitely got much more aggressive around Christianity. So again, the biggest thing we can say is Christian Solidarity Worldwide, Open Doors, and others who are members who work in these spaces do incredible work, both to support those there and to bring these stories to our attention. But they do feed into this wider narrative, an unstable world where we have chaos and instability, and some actors will find moments to push into that, be the strong man in response to that, or to use the chaos as cover to get their own agenda moving forward. And we've got to be a little bit savvy to some of that, some things we try and bring into play here, and also to see the underlying stories that are going on behind it and to call some of this stuff out. And then we've got to use the networks and channels we have to talk about these 70 Christians who were killed. These were our brothers and sisters in Christ, remote as they feel to us in these moments, who were massacred by machete simply for being Christian, and nobody wants to talk about it. So we're at least going to do that in this moment because we have the freedom to at least talk about it and to pray into those spaces, and for many others. So the DRC's gone up the World Watch list. I think it was in the 30s. It's moved up quite a number of places because of this kind of violence. But this is happening in lots of other spaces, and I think is going to be a product of this more unstable world in which we live. So we have increasing freedoms in some ways and increasing openness to talk about faith, and then other ways in which it's going to be curtailed and pushed back, and we'll see that globally. But really important stories for us to be discussing.
Yeah, definitely. That's really helpful. And I will link the Open Doors page in the description notes. So please do check out their website, check out the World Watch List if you haven't seen it, the kind of top countries where things like this are happening. And I think it's so important for us to keep that global perspective of our brothers and sisters. And yeah, as Peter said, it can feel so distant because our situations are so different. But we really need to be praying for them. You know, when they feel like they don't have the words to pray, we can be praying. You know, it can be so easy for us to kind of get bogged down in the things that are hard about church here, whether it's kind of we have an evangelistic event and not as many people as we wanted to came, or whatever it is, or that kind of fear of telling someone that you're going to church. But we can walk into church without the fear of something like this happening, and that is not something to take for granted. So I think that perspective is really important for us. But yeah, I really do encourage you to be praying and be kind of going and kind of looking at these stories when they do come out, because yeah, there are things happening that we aren't always informed about on our media platforms. You are listening to Cross Section. Thank you so much for listening or watching, which you might be doing as well. Yeah, we love having these conversations. We love kind of talking about politics or the other, you know, or cultural stories, or the stories about the global church. But please do get in touch with us. We want to hear from you. Please do email us at crossdocksection@eauk.org. We'd love to hear what conversations you find particularly helpful, particularly interesting. Yeah, whose opinions you agree with, maybe don't agree with, let us know. We want to hear from you. But yeah, please do check us out on all the social media platforms, and thanks for your engagement. But I am quickly gonna lead us into our final topic for today. Monday night is the Oscars, the kind of highly anticipated big night in film. So we thought we'd have a fun little final conversation about the films that are nominated, our predictions, what we've enjoyed, how as Christians we can be responding to these different films. So I'm just going to throw it out there. What of the Oscar-nominated films have we enjoyed?
This is definitely Alicia's specialist subject, but I've seen Conclave on my trip to Rwanda. Was on the plane, which I enjoyed. I'm not a fan of the ending. You can switch it. I'm not going to give it all away, but I thought it was building the suspense in the conclave and picking a new pope, and it was interesting. I think Ralph Fiennes was good in Stanley Tucci, but a bit of an anticlimax at the end. I haven't strictly watched Wicked, but I feel like I have. I have two daughters who seem to sing lots of bits of it and talk to me about it and tell me all about it. It's not even the whole story. I think they've already done half of it or something so far. I mean, they seem to be dragging it out. The one other thing I'll say is that often the Oscars absolutely dominate and they're the big story. It is interesting this moment. I think it was Mark Sayers was saying on his Rebuilders podcast. So often they dictate culture, and politics feels like it can be downstream and influenced by culture, which dictates what's happening in the Super Bowl show and these big moments. I think at this moment, what is happening globally in the politics is driving the agenda. It's almost like culture's not irrelevant, but it is back to its place of, I suppose, a little bit of a little moment's pause and out of it. I don't think it's driving the conversation in the same way, though there will undoubtedly be interest. So I can only talk about Conclave. That's about it. And I thought it was fine. I'm not sure it's an Oscar winner.
No, it's not an Oscar winner. It might get things like screenplay and, you know, cinematography, all the important stuff to say about craft or costume design and stuff like that. Yes, I have watched Conclave. Can you believe it? June 2 is also in this category, and no one's talking about June 2. Yeah, that came out recently. So that shows you how big a blockbuster it was and how quickly forgotten it was as well. And then A Complete Unknown, which is the Bob Dylan biopic. Yeah, I don't think that's going to do big at the Oscars. I think what will do big, and I haven't watched it for personal holiness and consecration, and I'm not endorsing this film and saying that you need to go watch it because it's got very explicit sex scenes in it. But I think the theme of the film, The Brutalist, I think actually captures a lot of the current conversations that we are talking about right now. It's a film about post-World War II. It's about a Holocaust survivor that leaves Hungary and looks to set up new life in America. And it's these themes of how do you rebuild both personally, both nationally, how do you confront the issue of war and move forward. And I think there's a lot of the learning of World War II that we I'm not using the royal we, where some global leaders have forgotten what the purpose of kind of international cooperation, diplomacy, coming together, peace, reconciliation. And so I think that will do big at the Oscars, but I haven't watched it. I've only watched the trailer and read a lot of reviews.
And
I too have seen the trailer and I am intrigued by it, and so I probably will at some stage watch it for the very reason you said, like how that defines architecture, how that defines our understanding of beauty, how you come out of horror and how you come out of incredibly challenging times. So I'm intrigued by it, but haven't got there yet.
the Breeds List also has an interval, I think. Is that correct?
What's that one?
The Breeds List has an interval in it.
Who knows?
I think because it's so long. So,
right.
so you need to make sure you've got a very clear evening or an afternoon to give it time. I feel like I'm about to expose myself as being less. Well, I'm definitely not on our level of our cultural correspondent here when it comes to film. But I have seen Wicked. That is the only one I've seen.
Good grief.
And I did really enjoy it. I have listened to the soundtrack quite a lot since then. I really enjoy it on runs. But anyway, that's an unnecessary detail. And I actually cried in it. I didn't think I would.
Good grief.
I said I wouldn't, but I did.
There's judgment.
Unless you...
Don't.
I'm getting...
No, you can hear the judgment.
I have had a lot of judgment from Alicia. Well, the thing is, I actually think she'll really like it. She just hasn't seen it yet.
Next.
I've been telling her for months to watch it. So she will, and then she will let you know.
Yeah, we'll do. I'll write an article about it.
Well, as you've seen it, and you've seen Cynthia, we have to ask you about Cynthia playing Jesus in something else. One Zanna.
Yeah, so this is really, well, it's really caught my eye this week. Might have, I don't know if you will have seen this, but Cynthia Erivo, who is in Wicked and was phenomenal in Wicked, it's been announced that she is going to play Jesus in a adaptation of Jesus Christ Superstar, I think in the Hollywood Bowl in the summer. And this has caused huge controversy, as I'm sure we can all imagine. I was really shocked. I mean, I've never seen Jesus Christ Superstar. I already know that it's kind of a bit wild anyway. So I can't say I know loads about how it's done. But I was surprised that they have got a woman to play Jesus, a queer black woman. And I can understand why there is controversy. I mean, Peter, what's your opinion on this?
Well, the Telegraph, somebody sent a link saying, "Don't complain about a queer black woman playing Jesus if you care about free speech." Well, I do care about free speech. I'm still entitled to complain. It doesn't mean I want to shut it down. And also, Jesus in Jesus Christ Superstar is not exactly playing Jesus. I mean, I think the problems arise long before we get to that. I mean, in a world of freedom, it doesn't maybe to say it doesn't bother me is too flippant, but I'm not overly concerned. Jesus is more than capable of defending himself in these moments. That said, I'd like to push people and say, would you do the same thing around other faiths? No, you wouldn't. Because Christianity is the place in which freedom comes from. Freedom is there right from the garden, right from the word go. We have always been proponents of free speech, freedom of belief, freedom of religion for these very reasons. So it's absolutely entwined in our faith, and it's a core narrative of the biblical text, freedom right from the Exodus narratives out. So I'm always going to root it in that. And so from that point of view, maybe to say I don't care is too flippant, but I don't really mind. That's not a real playing of Jesus. I just love that our culture still wants to talk about this and wants to put Jesus at the center of the conversation in some ways.
Smart
I'm
move.
intrigued about that. So it opens a place to have a better conversation. But Alicia has more objections than I do.
No, I don't. It's a smart move to put Jesus in the center of the cultural, political, socioeconomic conversation. I'm just annoyed that Cynthia Erivo has decided to participate in this, because I think she's an talented and incredible artist and a great British export from the UK to America. But with that, I'll say no more.
Her final words. But no, I think Peter's right. I mean, Jesus Christ Superstar is its own thing, but I think it is, and I have been thinking another kind of religious figure would this happen, and I just feel like often it is Christianity that people are just allowed to kind of do things to, and then the Christians get annoyed, and the Christians are getting annoyed again. I feel like that does kind of sometimes feel like a repeated narrative in the media. But yeah, I guess we will find out on Monday what happens with the Oscars and potentially react if anything super exciting happens in next week's episode. But yeah.
I think Yeah, and I think the takeaway for me is we've got to be careful that we get more annoyed about what's happened in the DRC and
Yeah,
India and not allow ourselves to get more annoyed about what's happening in Jesus Christ Superstar.
for sure.
In various ways, Christianity is finding itself right at the heart of big conversations right now. And we've got to be wise in our discipleship journey as to how we respond, how we lead on that, how we take the opportunities that presents. And I do think it presents huge opportunities, but there are big challenges. And so we rightly centered around what's happening in the DRC and India and our persecuted brothers and sisters elsewhere. And we need to be really careful that things like Cynthia Erivo don't become a total sideshow, interesting as they are, and they might allow us to have a missional conversation. And I think that's the biggest challenge in this moment, is to discipline our own hearts and minds as to where we are putting our attention in this moment in really healthy ways. And that is going to be an increasing challenge for us as worshiping kind of beings that we are. We all worship something, our hearts go after something. So let's allow our attention to be in the right place in this moment and not distracted by some of the sideshow conversations.
Yeah, for sure. And I just really encourage you to kind of keep that eternal perspective with all these things that are happening, these big conversations, these powerful people like Donald Trump, and others. We have got a God that is seated on his throne, and is bigger than all of this. And so as we face, even just clicking on the news, or reading these stories about other brothers and sisters, we can bring it all to him. He is bigger. And so I just really encourage you, as you kind of go out, whether it is kind of just feeling really overwhelmed by what's going on in Ukraine and the ongoing challenges there and the ongoing instability across our planet and what's happening to Christians as well. I just really encourage you to keep your eyes fixed on Jesus in all of that. But yeah, for now, thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Peter and Alicia, for your contributions. And I hope you have a really good week. Be blessed.
Hi, Alicia here. Thank you for checking out this episode. If you like it, please make sure to subscribe or share with a friend and leave a review. Till the next episode, take care and God bless.